Good evening, everybody. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, both past, present, and those that we've yet to meet. We're coming to you live from the Tactical Space Lab HQ, orbiting somewhere above St. Peter's in Sydney. I'd like to welcome the 100 or so people that we have in the audience, and also a special welcome to those that are joining us via the live stream this evening. I'm not going to speak much now. We're going to have a Q&A later, but firstly I'd like to introduce the director of the Tactical Space Lab, Josh Harle, who's going to talk a bit about what he does here and what he does with artists like Abdul Abdullah, who we have with us here this evening as well. Josh, what is it you do?
Good question. Thanks for the intro. I'm going to give a little bit of an intro to Tactical Space Lab and also to this project that we've been working on. This VR studio is part of a slightly bigger ongoing project that I'll talk about. Do we have are we on the presentation? Oops. Thank you. Cool. All right. So I'm just going to talk through the studio, and I've got my little slides here so I can make reference to it. So, Tactical Space Lab, we've been running VR studios since 2018. I have, to work with artists and sort of explore that space of the creative allowance of VR, this new technology. It's changing all the time. But even from the early days of VR, I suppose it was easy to be a little bit disillusioned with a lack of really interesting creative voices coming into VR. So the thing that I'm most focused on is this idea of demystifying VR. I come from a tech background, and then I moved into sculpture and humanities and bits and pieces. And I think I was a little bit frustrated early on in VR, especially VR art, where the way that people talked about it was as if it was this like totally impossible alchemy, and instead of talking about what VR artworks were like, you know, what the content of them were, they just sort of gave a round of applause for the fact that they'd been done. And VR actually isn't difficult to really get stuck into. It's just it's a myth around how opaque it is. And really, it's like learned hopelessness. If you feel like it's going to be difficult, you're not going to get stuck in and start experimenting. And you don't have to finesse everything, but those experiments are always going to be really interesting. So I've been working across different sort of age groups and cohorts of people. So thank you. To try and take what we've been doing in artist workshops. So working with an artist with an established practice, exploring how we can use VR to fit into their, like basically in sympathy and in conversation with their practice, rather than just sort of shoehorning it into the way that they work, and then taking that and using it as a showcase to bring VR to different audiences. So, for example, I've worked with some postgrads, done some stuff just with general creative communities, done some stuff with high school students, and probably the more fun, kind of the technical capabilities changed between the different cohorts of students, but the teeny tiny adorable humans are heaps fun as well. And for these ones, I could go into these groups and say, here's an artist, here's the story that the artist is trying to tell. We could look at the process, the works that they made, and then sort of get stuck in based on how we did those original workshops. So, this artist, we worked with photogrammetry, so we could build models and then create 3D objects from that, and then we could do like Play-Doh cities that we made in full scale in VR. Oops, I just accidentally went in the wrong direction. Can you go back? Cool. Oh, yes, good. That's where are we now?
Field guide, yeah.
Oh, back there, yes. Or collage and bits and pieces like that. Great, cool. So for this project, this is a continuation of the VR studios that we've been doing since 2018. we've been through a bunch of artists so far. Abdul's the first of a set of 3 for 2022. I am so happy to have worked with some amazing artists in the past. Like, everyone's been incredible, and it's just been an amazing experience, both sort of being able to create this. When you do collaborations like this, we've got Andrew Borrell in the audience who knows personally that process of this kind of like creating something totally magical that wouldn't have existed from either one of you. That's been fantastic, and it's been a joy to work with Abdul. What we're trying to do is fit these into a little bit of a bigger project where... Is my mic on?
Yes.
Good. We do the VR studios, and then, wildly ambitiously, in VR, tell the story of the making of that VR studio and the conversations that we've been having. So part of this, what we'll be demonstrating today is our VR studio. And then, sorry, can you go forward? Thank you. Yeah, and then we're going to go through some of the, so these are the artists. Matt Chun is the next artist. Katie Plummer is the third artist. I can't control this at all. This is totally unwieldy. Okay.
This is kind of a reflection of our project, actually.
Technology.
It's the problem coming from space.
I just want to... Oh, it's because your mouse is on the thing. Can you leave the mouse over the projector and then I can like bop it? No, that's not working. Oh, yes it is. Character tests. Yeah, we've been doing some really fun things sort of adjacent to the main VR studio to look at how we can do that sort of VR storytelling. And the idea is to kind of riff on things like Waking Life, a film from the 90s, I think, and a more recent thing called Midnight Gospel, which is basically like an animated podcast to explore this idea of having these conversations in VR and be able to like kind of very specific kind of political and sort of art consequences of VR while we're sort of there. So we've been doing some fun things with building silly models of each other, or of Abdul mainly. Have been posting a lot of mildly embarrassing, weird things of motion capture. We have some videos of. This is a mildly embarrassing motion capture thing from the other day. So the tech is really interesting. I'm actually not so wildly excited by things like this, which is meta-human, just because I think it's sort of thinking about representation in a very literal sense. Those tech people don't really have much of an imagination, and it's the best that they can do, thinking about representing yourself in a totally photorealistic way. But it's also pretty engaging. That's my head. What's the last example here? Oh yeah. Yeah, just super powerful, and it's really, really quick to do these sort of reconstructions of characters that would have taken quite a lot of effort. And this one we did a little bit of a scan. I went to Abdul's studio, took a bunch of photos, and then did a 3D reconstruction of his head, and then popped it into the system. It just builds a totally fully...
He's got like a neck
character.
like a rugby league player there.
Yeah, well,
Why did you do that?
I did augment it a little bit. Cool. Oh yeah, this is my funnest one. This is from the other day. It's like a good fun to get started.
Oh, he does that at parties.
Yeah, some fun things to play around with this. Cool. All right. I think we can talk about the work, eh?
Okay, yeah.
So we did, in the past live streams, also fairly technically ambitious, we've live streamed the headset at the same time as having the talk, so we could sort of have one person in the headset and the other person talking through. Just, I realized that the headset hates being in this environment for trying to track, but I've got a video that we can play through of the experience. And Harley, can you do the other view on the stream? So it's us and then and turn the lights on. Cool. So
Promise me you wouldn't do that.
So you want to talk about the work? You should talk about the work.
So, that's you. So the beginnings of it was from a series of paintings that I'd made last year. where they were these. My nickname for the series is Rocky Boys, but that's not the actual name of the title. But they're essentially these big rocks in the forest or in the ocean with these faces. What is it? Not anthropomorphized.
Yeah.
Anthropomorphized.
Yeah, I made them into people, and they were these like anxious little rocks, like in the ocean, or giant rocks, and they were kind of like ambiguous enough that my hope was that anyone could project themselves into those feelings. Like a lot of them look like you could imagine yourself if you were in bed at night at 3 a.m. just lying there thinking about everything wrong you've ever done. Like that's kind of what I was trying to put across with these rocks. They were these like almost forest creatures that you'd come across, or these ocean creatures. And I thought it would be a really fun and immersive experience to come across one of these rocks in real life. And there's a little bit of a gamification to the idea, where I started to thinking about dreams. So how did you want to enter the experience? And the idea of like flying in a dream where you would like move your arms and legs. So the idea of swimming through space to get through space. So we started off in the sky, and you can hear this voice of the rock calling you, and it brings you down and invites you down into the space, and it has a little bit of a conversation with you once you land. And it's introducing the idea of telling stories or teaching you a lesson. And what I've done is recorded maybe like 20 different Malay folk stories. But there's the gamification part of it is that the rock gets a bit frustrated with you. So you've got all these little rocks behind you, all with little faces. And in a clear space where you've got enough room, you can walk up to the rocks and you can hear what they're saying. And they're all saying different things. And the idea with them is that they're trying to distract you. So you get distracted, you turn around, and when you turn around with it senses it, and you'd be able to explain it better than me. But the big rock knows that you've turned around, you're not looking at him, and he gets upset and he gets a little bit offended, and then like tries to get you to come back, and he's a little bit hurt by you not paying attention. And then when you turn back, he will take up the story, like sort of chastise you a little bit, but instead of taking up the story where he left off, he'll just start another story. So the whole point of the game, it's quite a frustrating game for everyone involved, but to hear the whole story, you have to focus in on on the main rock until it ends.
I mean, it's almost built to make it impossible to hear the whole story.
Yeah,
you have to be. Some people going through it were paying an incredible amount of attention, a surprising amount of attention to the rock. But yeah, it's and the little rocks in the background, because it's sort of spatial sound, you just hear these little niggling, like little characters in the background. That's really, really distracting. In developing it was really funny to sort of jump in and just like, it's very difficult not to crack up when you hear this little voice going, hey, trying to get your attention behind you.
And you can, when you've got it in your headphones, it's like 3D sound. So you can, if they're to your left, you can hear them to your left, or they're behind you, you can hear them behind you. And the closer you get to them, the louder they get. So when you walk around, you can go up and actually hear what they're saying.
And are they telling stories as well?
Mostly just trying to get your attention. Maybe some insults as well.
Can
Like
you
little
keep it
kids.
running in the background?
Yeah, like little kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of that. So thinking about those characters and the swimming down bit was like what you could use from VR. That how you could take what in particular about VR as an experience you get extra from any other way of representing it. It's like, well, that kind of bodily thing, this kind of uncanny. You had a particular sense of this use of your body through space from the dream, which is this like kind of slight disconnect, weird uncanniness that there was a sort of possibility to play with. And as a reminder, this VR studio has taken a lot longer than the previous ones, but the idea is that it's an experimental studio. So the idea is to sort of do these little studies as provocations or little experiments, and then test them and sort of go from there, basically. So it's not super polished, but it's there to be kind of a scaffold that we can think about whether something worked or something didn't work and see how things feel.
And like, Josh was saying, there's a few elements that I wanted to include. Like, I wanted to move through space in not a standard way. So like using your body in a particular way. I really like the idea of 3D audio. I like the idea of being pulled into different spaces when you're walking around. So it's not just a static experience. And I'd like that there was some consequence, not like very serious consequences, if anything, just like slightly annoying ones, but there is consequences to your actions in the space, which I quite like.
Hoping for absolutely.
So what aspect of VR appealed to you in terms of a medium that other mediums couldn't offer you?
Well, with my practice more generally, what I'm wanting to move towards, whether it's installation or large-scale paintings, is like an immersive experience where you walk into an idea as opposed to look at it from a distance. That appeals to me. And so VR is really good at that. Well, one of the negative things, like a couple of years ago, if you'd talked to me about VR, I would have sort of dismissed it because for me it lacked that communal experience, which is so much art is about, experiences as a community. But in the last couple of years, with the amount of Zoom calls I've done, the amount of isolated experiences that I've had, where you've got these virtual communities, it seems to make a little bit more sense to me. And as VR gets a little bit more accessible, as it gets cheaper, these types of things which were like obstacles for me are becoming less so, I think.
I mean, accessibility and cheapness aren't necessarily the same thing. Just thinking about the way that the technology is going, but it's always good to think about that side of things. Whether you've got like how big your audience is, but also whether you're excluding people one way or another. I think like with the new Quest 2 that we're using, it's much cheaper, and then the accessibility is actually like slightly less good in some respects because they've kind of mass produced it in a way that makes it less accommodating to people in particular ways. But that sense of virtuality, it's kind of part of thinking about going into these studios in 2022 is the fact that everyone has had some sort of experience of like both deeply frustrating and isolated sense of connecting to people only via Zoom, but also being able to find solace in it at the same time, and listening to a podcast or something when you don't have social interaction and kind of feeling yourself in that space or all that sort of stuff.
I had a really interesting experience over like during the lockdowns where I hosted a workshop. Like I do high school workshops all the time, usually with painting, but hosted a high school talk and workshop, not in VR, but in first person on the computer, where we were in a virtual space, and it was like screens floating in this space with our heads on them, like moving around this lecture theatre. And most of the kids were just like running into each other, like mucking around and jumping around. But like the fact that was possible was kind of cool. Like it was old technology. It looked like Doom, like from 20 years ago. But it was kind of cool that they were like these schools were wanting to play in that space.
But yeah, it's probably the teachers desperate and exhausted trying to figure out a way to teach in that context. But there you go.
So in a sense, you're almost cheating because once you've got somebody in the goggles and that they're immersed in your world, whether they like it or not, they can't just walk by. So it's an easier way, if you like, to immerse somebody in your world. And what is it through the parables that the rocks tell that you're trying to tell people?
There was like years and years and years ago, there was I watched on Today Tonight where they did like an EQ test with kids, where they'll give them one Kinder Surprise now, but if they didn't touch it for 15 minutes, or they didn't say how long it was. Yeah, remember that? Yeah. And they got to have 2 Kinder Surprises. Yeah. And I just liked that as a game. I thought that was really interesting, even though it's less rewarding than 2 Kinder Surprises, but it's the same game being played.
Yeah.
It's like your byline of the artwork, less rewarding than 2 Kinder Surprises.
yeah, exactly.
Less plastic too. No, maybe not. I don't know. Yeah.
And there were some, like, through this process has been really interesting for me, because like I'm not very technologically savvy. Like Josh is he's a technical wizard, and
I was invited because both of you look tech savvy compared to me. That's why I'm here. Yeah.
But he was showing me technologies where I had to sign a waiver as well, where I recorded. Wait, am I not allowed to say?
Yeah, no, we could talk about that.
Okay, so where I recorded a series of sounds and words, and then he could feed that into like an AI that can now speak with my voice, whatever it wants. So he could type something, and it'll talk in my voice, like, and it sounds just like me. So if you get a phone call that sounds weird, Scott.
Tell your bank.
That was you trying to get me to swap energy companies. Yeah.
And then we've been talking about that Wall-E program that people have been using a lot recently, where they've got like AI made images and they get really high quality. And Josh was saying, like, within a couple of years it's going to be AI made video. So will we be able to trust the video that we see if someone's just typed in typed in a description and then the AI has created that in a way that looks real?
It's kind of scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it would
Yeah,
be
man.
people like me.
And you signed that?
Yeah. I mean, like, ideally, by doing it in a critical way, it's, I mean, that's the thing, it's like, there's very few voices in a tech context where people aren't just celebrating and trumpeting sort of thing. Always a problem. I don't know if there's not very much oxygen or if all of the... Because I'm a giant curmudgeon. I come from a tech background, but I sort of like ditched it basically because I suppose this is an interesting thing to talk about. It's I studied computer science and cybernetics and was looking at... you build a robot and you put a robot in an environment, it has to pick up a ball and take it over there. And that whole process is sort of getting the robot to look at the world and then you kind of map it down into a much simpler form. That is the people who do it kind of just take it as a quite straightforward process, but you make so many assumptions in that process. It's a form of mapping and it is very political, and it's just really frustrating to be in a context where people are doing things which are a very political action of telling a story basically, or reducing, like, what's your version of this? Let's, using our limited perspective and our set of assumptions, reduce it down into something much more much smaller. And that's, there's so many technologies that do that, and that govern the way that we live our lives, basically.
So ultimately, this obsession with being able to recreate realistically false situations is probably going to push us back into in real life so that you can trust it. Although they'll then have robots, I guess.
It's an interesting one.
They were probably so lifelike that it could be a robot version of you. Because this doesn't sound... This is Abdul's voice, isn't it?
It is actually.
But it's distorted. This is not what he signed up to.
No.
No.
We don't have any examples ready to queue up, but there will be soon. I'll put some online.
It's always
fun.
What's that saying? Are you going to believe me or your lying eyes? Like, I think that's where we're going to get to.
I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah.
I'd like to throw it open to questions from the audience. I think we both have the capacity for the online audience to ask a question, but also the studio audience. Does anyone in the studio audience have a question?
And I guess we should say at this point that if there's anyone online who does want to ask a question, just put something in the comments, and our lovely assistant Harley will wave his limbs in our direction, I think, and read it out himself.
I'll go back.
Testing.
Agreeing.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Hello. Josh, I'm really interested in that tangent that you were just on then.
That's a rant.
Okay.
Be careful what you sign up for.
I'll take that rant. And I'm curious to get your opinion on whether you think VR has the potential to intervene in the way that we mediate the world we live in.
They have the potential to intervene. In as much as, I mean, if you consider it a tool of art making, then absolutely. I mean, like, if you think that it's possible for one thing that one person does to intervene in how the world is mediated, absolutely. Yeah, in the same way that the process of art making can illuminate certain things and sort of expand out the way that you think about the world. The problem is, in a commercial sort of sense, there's what people see, it's like that art film, that obscure art film that changes the way that you think about the world. VR is not at the moment something that gets obscure things into your eyes. It's the thing that gets the set of 12 games that are available on the Oculus store into your eyes. And if you don't buy it immediately, it just advertises it to you until you do. So some of that is the ecosystem of how different voices get distributed, I suppose. And there's some, I think, what was it, the ABC, I think, SBS, it's very early on in VR, tried to make a platform for not so much spatial VR, but 360 stories. But there's a lot of room for platforms, or for ways of allowing more diverse voices to be platformed and not just get drowned out by all of the major studio bits and pieces. I don't know if that's a good answer to the question. But.
That scares me a bit with meta and stuff like that. It's just like, it seems like a platform for paywalls.
Yeah,
like
and it's the world, the internet's already spent the last 20 odd years going in that direction to the point where you can't, there's so much, the signal to noise ratio of everything that you do online now is awful. And then thinking about the little meta-humans and the cloned voices is, yes, okay, I avoided, this is my version of avoiding that rant. So.
Any other questions from the audience here? I'd like to know, was there a question there, sorry? No, I'd like to know about the collaborative nature of the process and how, you've both got great creative energies and how you worked through that to create I know this isn't a final version, but how that collaborative process worked.
Well, it has been different to your previous ones. So one of the things that Josh has told me worked previously, it's been like a 2-week intensive where people are there for 2 weeks working in the space and building it. And I'm the jerk in the situation where Josh is like, okay, we'll set 2 weeks aside. And I said, no, I can't. It's going to be impossible. So what we've been doing is working remotely. I'd say the majority of time that we've spent together collaborating have been like hour-long conversations on the phone where we're in each other's headsets. Like I'm in my studio painting or whatever, and we're talking about things. We've got hours of recordings where we've recorded both ends and brought them back together, which has all been fed into AI and stolen my voice. But it's that has been the bulk of collaboration. I'd say we both go on rants a lot, so that was good. We've got lots of ranting, and I think it's been really illuminating the conversations that we've had. And then I think about 5% of our conversations have gone into the idea, but there are no bad ideas in brainstorming, so we're all just throwing shit at the wall until things stick.
And I think you had quite immediately. I mean, one thing that I tried to do with all of those incubator sort of style things that we did definitely for this one as well, is just that sort of process of trying to give a sense of both kind of what the really touchstone amazing uses of VR have been in a creative context, but also what the kind of less sophisticated what a general audience who has been exposed to VR would have seen, like the zombie games. Although zombie games are excellent, so that's fun. And just what that sort of what the vocabulary of different experiences in VR looks like, so that if you make something in VR, you know where you sit and you're kind of responding to that, rather than sort of coming entirely from a different discipline and speaking in a different language. It's good to sort of bring different ideas and speak in a different language, but there's a possibility of coming in and not being aware that there's a kind of set of conventions or just sort of references and things that an audience already has with them, which is for Joan's work, that kind of that whole work was responding to the expectations of VR people.
Yeah, I remember talking to Joan, and she described VR as a greedy space or a selfish space, because it was all about the person's experience of it rather than how they might affect it.
I think in the game, VR coming from games, is very much fantasy fulfillment, or sort of like in the same way that games have those themes quite often. And there's outliers as well. There's like very different ways of telling stories that do really interesting things specific to what you can do in a first-person story. But so we did that and went through some experiences, and
Josh has lent me an amazing gaming PC.
Yeah.
So I got to play all these different types of video games.
Did you play Alex at all? Yeah.
A little bit, but not much. My apartment is very small, so my gaming space is I can't walk around.
You need a virtual apartment that you can walk around in and then put into VR to do it. This game, Half-Life Alyx, is a game that I probably spent the longest of any other game playing in VR, and I kind of wanted Abdul to get to the point where you get, I think I might have spent like a 4-hour session, which is a long time in VR, and the things that you're doing, the way that you're engaging in the environment is like you have different capabilities than you do physically, so you can sort of grapple around effectively. And the hangover that you get from that after playing for 4 hours is a really interesting thing that's kind of impossible to explain in the sense without reference to that. So it's like you get out and you want to move from one side of the room to the other, and you have a really bodily sense that you can move by like effectively grappling or however you're doing it in that game.
See, I'm really scared of that. I get feelings of disassociation when I put sunglasses on.
I mean, like, you'll try and grapple. If you ring me up and you're like, the grapple hook isn't working, then it's like, okay, let's go back to it. But it's super interesting, that sort of allowance of VR, how it can kind of reconfigure your body in space in a particular way as well, which is, I mean, sort of playing with the swimming dynamic is an element of that, I suppose.
I have a question from the lovely Julianne Pearce in Adelaide, and Julianne's saying, one of the strangest sensations in VR is looking down, but you have made a real feature of falling through the clouds to the ground. Was that a very conscious part of creating this work?
Yeah, there was like that sense of height, which is one of the things, and I've seen other, like, one of the first times I put a VR headset in was in a 7-story video games arcade in Bangladesh, weirdly, in Dhaka. And it was very simple experiences, but you put the headset on and there's just a beam across the street, on a beam across the room, and you walk across it, but then all of a sudden you're on a beam walking from building to building, and that sense of looking down was really terrifying. Yeah, vertigo, that's the word.
Yeah. Our collaborative alumni Alex Seaton is here in the audience, and we played a little bit with the this totally involuntary bodily sensations that you can do with VR, which is super fun. I think, I mean, one thing that Julianne might be making reference to as well is the fact that you don't have a body generally, and you don't see your feet, and the sort of the fact that you're not physically represented or virtually represented in that space. And this one we've kind of cheated. The hands attract, and the body is just, I don't know, haven't really thought about what it looks like looking at your body and seeing your feet sort of dangle in that kind of way, because I just stuck it in. And I'm like, yeah.
In previous iterations, Josh has put a like, when we were doing it just before, it's like a pink balloony person, but in previous iterations it's a 3D rendering of me, so it's like my feet and my shoes.
And do your cheeks flap as you fall?
No, but he mucked up my hands and there was a nipple on one of them.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was wondering whether we should mention that or not. But,
it was really disturbing. But
that's a genetic throwback, I think. Yeah.
It's a Bond villain reference, I think, as well, having a third nipple. It just wasn't in his hand.
But then seeing my shoes below me, but then my feet not doing what my feet were doing, that was a very strange experience.
Yeah.
They were more like puppeting around like this.
Yeah.
Did you find that you actually immersed yourself in it and let go quite easily, like into the whole experience, or were you still fascinated by its strangeness?
I'm mostly fascinated by its strangeness, but I haven't spent the 4 hours in there before, but I can, like, with that Half-Life Alyx game in particular, it's like it's got the graphics of a brand new video game. It's pretty insane what they can do and what you can do with that amount of money and time, and I can imagine getting completely lost in that. I was so surprised, like, putting on the Oculus the first time, because when I tried it overseas, it's like really rudimentary technology. So this one, putting the headset on and seeing what was possible, it was pretty mind-blowing.
And have you, with your experience here, this is quite experimental, is it drawing you into working more with VR?
Yeah, and technologies like it. It's something I definitely want to explore going into the future. The idea of the immersive experience, whether it's VR or augmented reality or working in those spaces, like I'm still hesitant. Like there's something very simple for me to make something with my hands, and there it's done. It's less mysterious, but I have enjoyed the process and working with Josh.
Yeah,
it was good. Those rants were really enjoyable.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like the conversations.
I mean, like, part of that thing of the assumptions and the resonances of the VR audience. It's like working in VR. You know, we've talked a little bit about NFTs. It's like it's very hard if you're working in something that has this idea of novelty to it to avoid looking like you're doing it for the sake of novelty in a particular way. And I think, I mean, like, so Joan Ross was the first artist that I worked with, and then that work kind of inspired an Acme commission that we managed to make both be a massive VR commission work, but also kind of have the emotional quality of not liking or not being committed to VR, basically, sort of quite a dark take on what VR was, which was really nice to be able to sort of, and like maybe there's the opportunity to do that in these studios as well. It's like, because it's this experimental context and we're just sort of seeing what can come out with it, it's like, you know, not so much just not like scientists sort of dispassionately experimenting, but a little bit like that as well. It's like, well, what can we get from this? We're not in love with it. I'm not in love with. I am massive. I'm totally curmudgeonly about all technology. I'm cynical as anything, but it's nice to be able to sort of see what I can do.
Because that's what I was wondering. Because you mentioned earlier that VR actually offers you something that you actually strive for in your work, which is the immersive experience. Having been involved in VR, has it opened up any other surprising avenues to you of artistic expression that you hadn't expected and that you might then pursue?
The way that I was looking at it was very much from like a gaming perspective, but also immersive theatre. And I do like the idea of that. And it's been a long time since I've been to an immersive theatrical production that you could engage with and responded to you as a person in the space. So that was a really enjoyable aspect, and I could see absolutely the possibility of applying VR to those spaces. And as the technology builds, being able to actually share these spaces with other people in a realistic way. And that's one of the things that holds me back still, is that it still feels like a solo experience. Like, and I remember doing Joan's one at Sydney Contemporary and putting it on. It was an amazing experience, but you're in there by yourself, and so you only can talk about it after the fact. And one of the things that I like specifically and particularly about visual art, not that this is not like dismissive of other art forms, but like say comparing it to theatre or that type of performative art or film or something like that, one of the benefits of art is that you can have a conversation with the person right next to you about the art that's in front of you, as opposed to being like told to shush at a movie. So so I'd like, when that comes into the technology, I reckon that could be very exciting.
Yeah, is that available yet? That's because I mean these games where there are hundreds of people, sometimes I think thousands playing the one game. Is that not available to you because of the constraints of the budget or the expense or the technology? How can we get more than one person into an artistic space at one time?
I mean, there are platforms. There's something called what is it? White Walls or something. There's a sort of a multi-user social gallery designing VR platform where you build your gallery and then people sort of pop in from wherever to visit and then wander around and look at these JPEGs on the wall and then chuff off. I don't think we really looked at any of that sort of social collaborative side of things in the VR.
We touched on it a little bit, but the feeling that I got, and maybe this is me being curmudgeon as well, but these virtual spaces that exist are kind of more reflective of like an internet forum, where you've got anonymous people coming in who have the capacity to just be really awful to each other.
Like a gallery.
Like a gallery.
Yeah. I mean, this was an element of your idea that I was really excited by. It was to think of the rock and the little annoying little rockies as an allegory for the experience of being on the internet, and the fact that there's all these sort of different voices trying to distract and subvert and sort of lead you astray, and that in any situation it's impossible, and sort of that signal to noise ratio sort of thing as well. Like the capacity, this is what I really worry about, the metaverse and all that sort of social.
One of the rocks tried to tell me to vote Trump.
Yeah, we'll get used to it. 'Cause I mean, thinking Facebook trying to go into it. Facebook has no idea of how to build a proper community. They do technology. They don't understand community building at all. And they benefit from creating hate, basically. They have in the past. And the whole point of Meta was that it was launched as a distraction from the whistleblower who was saying that their business practice was encouraging hate speech. So for them to go into the VR community spaces and have adverts of like a whole bunch of diverse people of different ages playing games together and all being happy, and it's like that's if they can't make that sort of space in reality, and when there's license in a VR context to do whatever you want, and anonymity and all that sort of stuff, it's going to be absolutely bedlam and hell. That's my curmudgeonly take.
On that note, do we have any other questions from the audience?
I've just got a question.
Victoria.
So when the work is finished, what form is it going to take? I remember that you mentioned that you would be in VR, talking about being in VR, which interested me.
Yeah. So this isn't the experimental studios. This is the thing. It's like the studies.
Yeah.
So all of them are there kind of as publications, and there is a potential to say this is really interesting. This is a something that can be pursued further. And thinking about how it fits into your practice and that sort of thing. For the bigger project that sits inside, a field guide to the interior, it's a little bit thinking about that the solitude and also the kind of virtual social spaces. I did think about that podcasty sort of thing where you're listening to two people having a conversation and there's a bit of back and forth and you kind of feel like you're part of the joke and part of that sort of moment. Which can be really nice. I was trying to, this is the one allowance to not being a curmudgeon, is to feel like there's value, especially in the sort of like COVID lockdown, for creating ways of people feeling comforted and safe and connected in virtual reality when there isn't any opportunity for it elsewhere. And I think that's still a possibility for VR. It's just like kind of hard to see it on them. There are communities, like VR social communities, like chat forum sort of things where you can get in and you're around friends and things like that. So the final form of that, a field guide to the interior, is both a baked animation and also a VR experience that you can use on the headset. But we'll post some more bits and pieces on that in the future, I suppose. We'll see how it goes.
And that's coming?
Yeah, it's in development. That's all meta-human-y bits and pieces and motion capture and all that sort of stuff. I didn't want to focus too much on the bigger project, but Jasmine Gaffond, who's the composer doing the soundtrack, is sending some really good stuff. It's good. We listened to lo-fi hip-hop to study to as the ambient setting music to today, and I think Jasmine's music is really good. It's just quite intense for a general get together. But I really want to showcase some of that stuff soon. She's just about to do some piano recording elements of that, so that's exciting. Cool. I can't believe how fast we've gone through this.
We've got another question.
Oh, yeah.
And
I was just interested in...
we should do the microphone for the sake of the live stream people.
No, it was sort of touched on. I was thinking about it throughout the conversation. Thank you. It's been really great sitting and listening to you guys talk. But it was touched on by Barry and also by Abdullah. Right now it is that sort of solo sphere or the online sort of sharing. So what's the dream architecture, hopefully, to come where the experiences, you go to a place where you can experience works in a gallery sort of context, though it's obviously not a gallery, and you know what I mean? So what would be the dream architecture of, say, a few years to come, hopefully, where people can go check out VR content and works?
I think all three of us will have different answers to that.
Right,
question.
okay.
Yeah.
what's your answer? Then I'll copy it.
I'm really inspired for this bigger project. The thing that I'm looking to is indie art games as a sort of way of a community and a kind of way of a model of distributing something that is basically like a fairly small group of people who see someone doing something interesting and unique and want to celebrate it and are fans of it because it sort of resonates with them. And free platforms, you stick your stuff up and you find sort of you post some of the stuff that you've done, and it's incredibly supportive. I only follow people in that world on Twitter, and people say that Twitter is incredibly toxic and horrible. But for me, it's really lovely, and that's really heartening. Yes, I think the galleries, watching. I think here in Australia, the relationship to tech art is how it fits with sort of contemporary art is really particular, but at the same time, that's not without its benefits. That whole sort of German tech hacky art sort of thing is so much focused on the tech. It's almost like fetishistically into the complexity of the technology, and there doesn't have to be very much kind of art sensibility to it. It can just be like mainly some weird tech hacky thing, which is good that it exists, but it's nice to also think about sort of a more social sort of thing. I'm going to put it on, otherwise I will just rant. I'll put it on someone else.
On me?
Yeah.
Just like fantasizing. I imagine it would be pretty cool to have like a lightweight headset, like a pair of glasses, where you have a shared augmented experience or something like that. So you could be standing next to someone and talking to them and seeing the same thing in the same space, or hearing the same things in the same space. I think that could be really nice. Realistically, I think it's going to be like the military and the pornographic industries are just going to push the technology, and then we'll see what we get after that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question in that, and I hate people saying it's an interesting question, but it's almost for me there's a sort of contradiction there about, and I think you hit on it there, where it's if the technology can progress to a point where it is like wearing glasses or sunglasses, and so it's not so limiting in terms of your interaction with other people, because the idea of getting together and then putting on these clunky headsets that basically isolate you, to then think that is a community experience, seems to me to be a contradiction. So I think it'll be, for me, in terms of it being something where it is less individualistic, will be when the technology gets to the point where you can experience it and still be part of the actual world around you, for it to be. I mean, otherwise you can all go and see a movie at a different time and then get together to talk about what you thought about it, even if you can't talk about it in the movie. But I think it'll be, and I'm sure the technology will get there. I think also, COVID has sort of affected people's, enhanced people's germophobia. So the idea of sharing headsets has become more traumatic for some people than it was, say, 2 or 3 years ago. So again, the technology might have to develop in that direction to make the communal possibilities more realizable. But it'll be interesting to see. Also, for me, it's how it will open up possibilities for artistic expression as opposed to a fascination with the technology, itself. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Is your microphone on? Is my microphone on? Yes. The augmented reality bit, the distinction between something, I actually find the fact that VR is such a sort of
immersive.
Yeah, an air walled, I suppose you'd say, in a sort of hacking context. It's not connected to anything at the same time, even though it obviously is. But I find it really reassuring because augmented reality has got such a political implication. It can do awful things in the way it sort of, like Pokemon Go, kind of massively changed the use of space. One company, with the switch of a button to launch, changed the way that people use space across the world. And so many stories about that causing massive problems.
Parking problems.
And people falling off cliffs and people getting mugged and all that sort of stuff. But it's like, for me, virtual reality it avoids immediately getting into that territory of some very, very profound ideas of how we perceive the world.
Like you're telling me about, you could augment somebody else's face on someone when you talk to them.
That, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's absolutely going to happen. But Charlie Brooker, the writer for
that.
Yeah, exactly. the guy who wrote Black Mirror very, very early on in augmented reality was saying that, as a joke, that you could replace homeless people with Disney cartoon characters. And it's like, yes, it's a joke, but also it's not too far from like some of the things to worry about if you're not sharing a consensual reality in that sense. I mean, we already aren't sharing a consensual reality, and all these things about like Dali and fake news and sort of thing is part of that. And then to sort of tap into just ramping up the power of technology to control the way that you see the world just worries me. I don't have an answer to it. That's just like I'm much more comfortable with staying as far away, where it's like you just have kind of an experience which exists in its own kind of fictional context.
Okay, so I've got 2 more questions. This one from Julianne again. To Josh, you have a really interesting studio model where you are an artist commissioning other artists to experiment and create new work. Can you talk about what's inspiring you to work in this way?
I can, but I'll do it really quickly because I feel like I've been ranting too much. I think it's that frustration with this sort of like tech way of thinking about things and appreciating the fact that it massively benefits from different ways of thinking coming into it. But the demystifying, basically, it's like it's not hard to do really interesting things, and the world benefits from doesn't just benefit in a feel-goody sort of way, it comes up with better ways of solving problems if you're not pursuing the solution according to like a particular ideology. Obviously, and especially when those I'm not going to rant.
You say demystifying, but when I see it on the computer, it's like watching the guy in the Matrix, watching the green things go down.
Hacking into the mainframe. Well, you got to hack into the mainframe every so often. Okay.
Well, the nature of my question was around VR. As a central experience for the individual, it puts you in this illusion that you are the center of the narrative. And a lot of VR experiences are exactly geared around that. So when we talk about potential architectures of a social VR, you're talking about moderated forums or forums where you need to moderate the worst of human nature. I know you, Josh, I know I'm benefiting from our discussions before, but I'm challenging you, like, where do you see the role of the moderator in any discussion as an advocate of free speech?
This is good.
That's my job.
So this is a funny thing because I came out of tech, and before I went into humanities, I thought about the world in very much a Mark Zuckerberg kind of way. Like a really, what he calls them, these free speech absolutists. And like things like positive discrimination or whatever. I had a really particular kind of old school philosophical way of thinking about the world that thankfully has gone through me and I've passed into different ways of thinking. Your question is really nice because it talks about 2 sides of things. One is that kind of greedy engagement of the person in VR to the world, the fantasy fulfillment sort of thing that you can imagine in 1,000 different VR scenarios, versus the idea of we're trying to push people away from that. Basically, there are the polar opposite is the idea of VR as the ultimate empathy machine, which is what it was trying to be sold as, this ultimate empathy machine. And some of that, I think, was just kind of the novelty being more engaging. So you could get people to watch like collisions. You can get people at Daedalus to watch collisions and have access to a story that they never would have seen, because at the time the technology was new and you could get some millionaire, billionaire to stick a VR headset on. And I think that sort of thing of VR is the empathy machine is a question of like empathy fatigue. It's like photojournalism. You can get people for a certain amount of time based on the novelty. But it's really interesting to have the two against each other. Right? The one is like fantasy fulfillment, it's a very selfish way of engaging in the world. And all, first-person computer games are all about taking power and sort of, championing it over the world, versus this concept of VR as being able to connect you to other people's stories and make you feel in particular ways. Yes, I don't. If moderators are good, I'm not. This is part of community building, and if people put 1 iota, like a tiny fraction of the amount of effort into developing social knowledge around community building that they put into developing disruptive technologies, the world would be a much better place. There you go. It's better than the life is hell ending.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I've been, yeah, I'd just like to thank, before we wrap up, thanks everyone for being here. Thank you for people joining us on the live stream, and thanks for Australia Council. This project is funded by Australia Council and Create New South Wales, and it wouldn't exist without them, so thank you for that.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you, John. Thank you for Abdul Barry for
My pleasure. Thank you.
Cool.
Excellent. Can we go back to the mood lighting now?